As you might know, the 39th president started receiving home hospice care in February of last year. He and wife Rosalynn Carter were married for 77 years before she died. He passes away as the longest living president in U.S. history. And MSNBC's Jose Diaz-Balart gives us a look back at his life and legacy.
My name is Jimmy Carter, and I'm running for president.
Jimmy Carter's election in 1976 confounded the conventional political wisdom. Until that year's Iowa caucuses, in which he trounced his better-known rivals, Carter was virtually unknown outside of his native Georgia. He grew up in Plains, Georgia, in a farm that lacked electricity and indoor plumbing. He attended the U.S. Naval Academy, served as a Navy lieutenant, and then came home to run the family peanut farm. He met Rosalynn Smith, the woman who would become not only his wife, but his closest friend and advisor. Carter entered politics, serving 2 terms in the Georgia State Senate. And in 1970, he was elected governor. In his inaugural address, he made it clear there was a new breeze blowing through the South.
The time for racial discrimination is over.
Would our first challenger enter and sign in, please?
But outside of Georgia, Carter remained largely unknown, even stumping the panelists during an appearance on What's My Line back in 1973. Just a year later, he announced he was running for president. This political outsider and born-again Christian was a welcome change for a public disillusioned with its leaders in the wake of Watergate and other scandal. In the general election, Carter narrowly defeated President Gerald Ford, becoming the first president from the Deep South in almost a century.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
In the first sign this would be a down-to-earth presidency, Jimmy Carter walked the entire way from the Capitol to the White House during the inauguration. Austerity was in the air.
There's no way that I or anyone else in the government can solve our energy problems if you are not willing to help.
Once in the White House, however, Carter's lack of experience in Washington politics became a severe handicap. The independent-minded Congress failed to approve some of his most important legislative initiatives. Indeed, for many, he dealt with matters of foreign policy much more skillfully than he did domestic. He was firm in his commitment to human rights.
No member of the United Nations can claim that mistreatment of its citizens is solely its own business.
When the Soviet Union sent troops into Afghanistan in 1979, Carter responded with punitive measures against the Soviets, including a trade embargo. But one of his actions seemed to anger Americans as much as it did the Russians.
I have given notice that the United States will not attend the Moscow Olympics.
The major achievement of the Carter presidency was the signing of the Camp David Accords in September of 1978. Carter brought Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin and Egyptian President Anwar el-Sadat together for 11 days. The Camp David Accord served as the basis for a treaty signed by Begin and Sadat 6 months later in Washington. Jimmy Carter faced his toughest test of all when Americans were taken hostage in Iran in November of 1979. This time, neither his resolve nor the power of the American government was effective enough in gaining freedom for these hostages. Carter's boldest effort met with tragedy in the Iranian desert.
Late yesterday, I canceled a carefully planned operation which was underway in Iran for a later withdrawal of American hostages.
By making the release of the hostages the overriding goal of his final year, Carter jeopardized his prospects for re-election. Things were hardly better at home as the economy continued to deteriorate.
The erosion of our confidence in the future.
Carter's popularity plummeted. He blamed the country's problems on a crisis of confidence. His weakness brought a challenge from Senator Ted Kennedy for the Democratic nomination in 1980. Carter survived the battle, but he went into the fall campaign greatly weakened.
I'll bring new hope to America.
His opponent, Ronald Reagan, campaigned tirelessly to restore America to its former position of greatness. Jimmy Carter lost in a landslide. In 1982, he established the Carter Center, committed to advancing human rights and promoting democracy around the world. He built houses for the poor and worked for peace in Haiti and North Korea and Bosnia.
The bond of our common humanity is stronger than the divisiveness of our fears and prejudices.
And in 2002, at age 78, Carter became only the third U.S. president to be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. In August of 2015, Carter announced a troubling health diagnosis. A liver surgery where they removed a tenth of his liver revealed melanoma that had spread to his brain. But then, a little less than 4 months later, Carter revealed at Sunday school he was cancer-free, and his brain scans didn't show any signs or spots.
But they were responding to the treatment, and when I went this week, they didn't find any cancer at all. So I have good news.
Over the years, despite various health challenges as he aged, Jimmy Carter continued to build houses, to play a role in national politics, and to celebrate new milestones.
Salute.
In 2021, Jimmy and Rosalind marked their 75th wedding anniversary.
75 years, I can't predict.
Their love story continued until her death 2 years later, marking the longest presidential marriage in history. In 2024, Carter himself became the longest living American president, celebrating his 100th birthday. His tireless dedication to humanity and global efforts to preserve freedom all led to a new kind of modern axiom. Jimmy Carter, they say, was one of the best ex-presidents America ever had. Jose Diaz-Balart, NBC News.
Joining us now is Atlantic staff writer and MSNBC political contributor and our good friend, Mark Leibovich. He's also the author of the book, Thank You for Your Servitude. Mark, welcome to you. So some of these companies which made January 6 related pledges, and they include Goldman Sachs, General Motors, Bank of America, they're now each giving $1 million to the inauguration. Do you see this as anything less than a pay-to-play kind of move? I mean, what does it indicate about how corporate America expects its relationship with the incoming administration to play out?
Well, I mean, it's first of all, I mean, it's a little quaint to even talk about, norms and so forth and pay to play. I mean, this is obviously a completely different universe than what we were all experiencing 4 years ago, almost to the day, this year or this week. So, I mean, look, I mean, there's obviously been a retrenchment. I mean, obviously he's been forgiven for this. I mean, he's been forgiven by the biggest force out there, which is the American electorate. And it makes sense that corporate America is going to follow suit. And I think that's reflected in this, whether there's an actual pay-to-play going on, whether someone is actually, communicating with these companies and saying, well, if you give this, you will get that. It's hard for me to say, but obviously the norms that we've talked about for centuries or decades certainly are in a very new place now that Donald Trump has not only been in power, but is back in power.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's true. I mean, you can't know for sure if there is a official pay-to-play, but I mean, corporations could be hedging their bets, right? So there's that. There's also no sign that Trump is slowing down his peddling of Trump-branded merchandise. In fact, it seems like he's ramping it up. Besides the usual MAGA hats and coffee mugs, and there's other more swanky merch, which includes, ready for it, $299 Trump crypto president sneakers and his $199 victory cologne. Goodness knows what that smells like. But anyway, how significant is the money that Trump makes from merchandising compared to his other businesses? And would this be normal for anyone but Donald Trump?
Oh, of course not. No, I mean, but we started having this discussion, 8, 9 years ago now at this point. This is just the next iteration of it. I mean, we didn't hear anything about crypto 8, 9 years ago, but this is all, on brand. And it just seems like we've had a 4-year interruption of what something that felt like more normal administration was like under the Biden years. Now we're back to this. I obviously don't think that things like ethical norms or norms in general or how things have traditionally been done certainly applies to Donald Trump, and I don't think we should have any reason to be surprised that this is happening now.
Now, this is interesting because the New York Times recently reported that the identities of Trump's merchandise business partners, they're shielded through limited liability companies, LLCs, which are structured to allow those partners to remain anonymous. Times reporters who tried to track down the Wyoming address, for example, of a couple of these LLCs found rural strip malls or buildings populated by unrelated businesses. So, Mark, what do you make of the opaque nature of these operations?
You know, I think the opaque nature of it goes back to the fact that Trump world believes, and perhaps correctly, that they have a permission structure to do whatever they want, that the quaint sort of rules of this game don't apply anymore. And again, they've been forgiven by the American electorate, which is really all they care about. And they have 4 years in power, and it's not like he's going to be impeached over this. And he's kind of, oversight exists certainly in Congress. So, look, I just feel like, Donald Trump, his MO is going to be to do what he can get away with. And this is sort of an example of that.
In your most recent article, which I'm looking at and I want to get into here with you, you explore what politicians mean when they say, we need to start an important conversation about any particular issue that's long overdue. Right now, Democrats in their post-election slump seem to be the ones asking variations of this question. But what are politicians signaling when they call for these conversations, which you say never actually happen? How does this fit into the current dilemma that the Democratic Party is in?
Yeah, that's a good way of framing the question. I mean, obviously, people who have sat in this seat and who you have interviewed many times have tried to, mostly elected people, have dodged questions by sort of saying, well, I think the conversation we have to have, rather than stating an opinion on something, they will sort of kick it forward and defer and try to, just not answer the question. I think what we've seen is meet my cat. Oh boy, that's embarrassing.
I love your cat. Okay, go ahead. Finish the important stuff.
Democrats. I was hoping that would never happen. Democrats have been sort of putting off like who they're going to lead into the future, who is going to be their leader going forward. Clearly, the conversation about Joe Biden's age is something that put Kamala Harris in a terrible position, which by in large has put them in the position they're in now. I think at some point Democrats have to get on with the future, and there have been a lot of conversations that they have used to put off and haven't really gone there yet.
Okay. Can I just ask your cat's name while I show you? Ready for it? My cat.
Yeah.
That's
oh my
Tigger.
God, yeah. Yeah,
See?
that was
Eloise.
That was an amazing moment for me that I did not expect would ever happen. But with that, Alex, I want to wish you a happy New Year, because I think this is my last appearance on your show. And
well, it probably
Eloise
is,
also wishes you a happy New Year.
Well, then I will see you in the new year for sure. And your cat's welcome anytime in the show as well. We all love cats. Thank you.
I look forward to it. Thanks, Alex.
It is one of
Joining us now to dissect that all is outgoing Democratic Congresswoman Susan Wild of Pennsylvania. She serves on the House Foreign Affairs, Education, Labor, and Ethics Committees. Congresswoman, thank you so much. Really appreciate you joining us on this holiday break, I'll say. Let's start with Speaker Johnson's job security or insecurity. Final government spending bill passed. There were 34 members who voted against it. All of them were Republican. So we're clearly already seeing some opposition to Johnson in public. And then privately, too, as the Washington Post has reported, are we going to have a second act of Kevin McCarthy in which the speaker is deposed by his own party?
Well, I think the thing that is going most in Speaker Johnson's favor is the strong feeling that I believe the GOP will have to avoid another Kevin McCarthy situation where we were literally just stymied for several weeks and went through multiple votes before a new speaker was elected. And so I know that there will be that was not a good look for the GOP. I know they're going to be doing everything they can to avoid that, but it's going to be tough because there are some members of the GOP conference who are perfectly content to burn the place down. And there's nothing like failing to elect a speaker to start that process.
Yeah, I was going to say, your party leader, Hakeem Jeffries, has said Democrats will not bail out.
Because she's going to.
Yeah. Hakeem Jeffries has said Democrats will not bail out Mike Johnson if he needs the votes. We already have a handful of Republicans who said they will not vote or have hinted they won't vote for Mike Johnson. So if you were a betting person, would you bet now on Johnson retaining his post?
I would bet that it will take more than one vote.
Okay.
It's going to be hard to say how the margins will actually turn out, because keep in mind, although Leader Jeffries has said that Democrats will not bail him out, remember that there are some members of the Democratic caucus who hold on to their seats by a very, very thin margin, even more so now with the recent election where a number of new members of Congress were elected by a tiny margin. And a lot of those people are going to be wanting to show their bipartisan cred. And there are at least one or two members of the Democratic Conference who have traditionally the Republican conference has been able to count on them for an occasional vote in their favor. So I think it's going to be very, very interesting and dramatic, but I don't think that he will get it on the first vote. But I suspect that at some point cooler heads will prevail, because the last thing the GOP conference wants is a repetition of what happened when Kevin McCarthy was ousted. And frankly, I think they're looking around and saying, if not Mike Johnson, then who?
Right. Well, that's a good question. I don't know if there's anyone who can unite the entirety of the party, as we saw from the Kevin McCarthy saga. What's hanging over all this, of course, is that the government funding bill that was just passed only pushed the can down the road for 3 months. And then you have Secretary Yellen's letter today about the debt limit, which obviously they're going to take extraordinary measures. It's going to push it for several more months past the government funding deadline. But you have these two massive things that are going to happen early on in this administration. Having just gone through this process, do you have that much confidence that we will avoid a government shutdown? Do you have that much confidence that we will avoid a default?
So I came into Congress on a government shutdown back in 2018. You know, we've managed to avoid it since then, but it's been precarious at times. As far as a default, I do not expect that we will have a default. But what Donald Trump really wanted to avoid was the messiness of raising the debt limit, having it raised on his watch, which is why he was so vociferous against the bipartisan government funding arrangement that had been entered into and that he and Elon Musk very late came to and torpedoed. And it's understandable why he doesn't want to have that battle on his watch, but he's going to. And it's not going to be pretty. And he will have a lot of people in his own party who are going to give him a very hard time. And I don't think he or the speaker can count on most of the Democratic caucus to bail them out.
Interesting, because there are Democrats who want to eliminate the debt ceiling entirely, which was actually Trump's demand towards the very end of that fight. Is there a future in which it does get eliminated under Trump's watch?
I think there is a future for it to be eliminated, and you're absolutely right. There are a lot of members of the Democratic caucus, led by Brendan Boyle, who was the one who first introduced the concept. He's the ranking member on budget. Right. And yes, it's something that we absolutely should get rid of. But it has to be done in due course. And as you just saw recently, Democrats weren't going to cave on that bill on what Trump and Musk wanted the Congress to do just to get rid of that debt limit. So it's going to have to be done in due course. It's going to have to be done properly. And frankly, I don't know if the votes will be there to eliminate it altogether.
You just said something that kind of tickled me a little bit. Trump and Musk wanted. I guess we do have to put them together. I'm not going to say they're co-presidents, but there is this weird dynamic that's happening here, as we saw from the chaos around the government funding bill. Elon Musk was the one who actually initially complained about that bill, and then Trump was the one who jumped on board with his complaints. I'm just sort of curious, in your conversations with fellow Republican House members, and just sort of your observations from the chamber, who has more influence over the party right now? I don't mean that tongue-in-cheek, because I think the answer is Trump. But I am curious how much influence you believe Musk actually has over the party right now.
Well, I do think it's President Trump, but keep in mind that Elon Musk is the one who has threatened senators who have indicated that they might vote against some of Trump's nominees, and that he will put his very powerful purse behind primaries to make sure that those senators live to regret their votes against Trump nominees. So I don't think it's President Trump that the GOP conference will be keeping their eye on, but they always will have in mind that Elon Musk has his ear and Elon Musk has a lot of money.
And a megaphone, too. He controls Twitter.
And a megaphone.
And a megaphone, too. I want to ask you about the state of your party. Obviously, we're in this state of postmortems. Every Democrat has offered one. But the fact remains, Democrats are entering this new congressional term. They have significantly less power than they did. Obviously, they made one seat gain in the House, but they lost the Senate, lost the White House. And Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer told Politico this week that he believes the judiciary will serve as one of the Democratic Party's strongest lines of defense. You know, I got to be honest, talking with other Democrats, they are not as bullish on the judiciary being a line of defense for the party because of just the decisions that the Supreme Court has made, the fact that a lot of these judges are Trump nominees. I'm curious, what is your assessment of the role that judiciary will play in the next 4 years?
Not enough of one, unfortunately. I grew up in my adult life believing that the judiciary was the branch that we could always count on. And I no longer believe that. And I also question Senator Schumer's comments because the Senate actually left several open judicial nominees out when they in their recent efforts to clear a lot of them before a new Congress and a new presidency. So I don't think that anybody should be counting on the judiciary because the Supreme Court looms large. And most of the decisions that we are looking at least that Congress is looking at, are ones that have a federal question or a constitutional issue that will put them square before a federal court and ultimately the United States Supreme Court if it chooses to take those cases.
Exactly.
And I don't think we should count on that at all.
Yeah, day one, we're going to probably get an effort to end birthright citizenship. Before you go, I just want to ask you for personal reflections. You spent last 6 years in Congress. As you're finishing out your term here, do you have any advice for House members about how to make the institution any better, and what is next for you?
So my advice to anybody in Congress would be to keep your own counsel and follow your own mind, follow your own heart, follow your constituents' wishes, listen to them carefully, and don't be part of a herd mentality. I think that's really important. I think, frankly, that's what the American people are very much looking for. As for what I'm going to do, I'm going to give myself the grace of a month off in January.
No.
Yes, imagine.
No.
I've said to somebody recently, I have not been unemployed since I was 14 years old, so this will be truly unique for me. And but then what I really want to do is to continue to find a way to advocate for my community and for my country. It's been the most rewarding thing I've ever done in my entire life, and I want to make sure that it doesn't stop right here.
And this month, Senate Democrats called out the high court for a, quote, ethical crisis of its own making. A report from Democrats on the Judiciary Committee dives into the court's failure to enforce its own code of ethics. The investigation outlined Clarence Thomas's undisclosed luxury vacations paid for by a billionaire buddy. Democrats also blast Thomas for not recusing himself from January 6 cases despite his wife's support of Donald Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election. Y'all remember that. Joining us now, Justice Correspondent for The Nation, Elie Mystal, and MSNBC legal analyst and former U.S. Attorney Joyce Vance. She's a professor at the University of Alabama School of Law and co-host of the hashtag Sisters podcast, Sisters in Law podcast. Welcome to you both.
So the court has a lot on its plate coming up. I mean, on January 10th, the court is going to hear arguments in the case about pausing this TikTok ban. I'm just wondering, to the both of you, Donald Trump is flip-flopping on the TikTok. Obviously, somebody got to him here. At one point, he was for the ban, then he was against the ban, then he was for the ban again. Now he's against the TikTok ban. I personally am a TikTok user, honey, but the control by the stake by the Chinese government allegedly is very concerning. What do you all think about this? Because his, I just want to read, and this is from NBC News reporting. It notes that Donald Trump, this is what his lawyer is saying. President Trump takes no position on the underlying merits of the dispute. Instead, he respectfully requests that the court consider staying the act's deadline for divestment while it considers the merits of the case. What does that mean? Please. Joyce, Elie, please. What's going on?
I mean, here's what it means. It means that Trump's nominee to be Solicitor General of the United States, John Sauer, the lawyer who wrote this brief, which is an amicus brief. Trump is not a party to the case, but they've filed on his behalf. They're asking the Supreme Court to do something that the court cannot do. In essence, the brief says, hey, Donald Trump is a great deal maker and he's about to be president. So let's ignore all this legal stuff. about a law Congress has passed that's about to go into effect that will make it problematic for the people that host TikTok in the United States to continue to do that. Because that's what this legal fight is about. The enforcement mechanism, of course, is that the U.S. platforms can't continue to host TikTok in this country. It's not about Donald Trump making a business deal. But his lawyer, the future Solicitor General, if he's confirmed, is making this nonsensical argument. It certainly diminishes their credibility in front of the Supreme Court. But, you know, the problem, Simone, is this. That's all happening at this meta, technical, inside the law issue. And what Americans are seeing is Donald Trump saying, hey, come to me and I will resolve your business and legal problems for you. And boy, is that getting this administration off on exactly the footing we all knew it would start on.
Right, Ellie, that sort of call and response between the incoming president and the current Supreme Court is a part of what we have already watched and will continue to watch for. And it happens as the court, trust in the court is at an all-time low. You have this ethics report that came out. I'm sure you were just absolutely shocked by everything that was in it. But you had the Senate review it, and this is what they said, quote, any movement on the issue appears unlikely as Republicans prepare to take control of the Senate in January, underscoring the hurdles in imposing restrictions on a separate branch of government, even as public confidence in the court has fallen to record lows, right? So you have what Joyce is saying about the fact that folks can come directly to Donald Trump, make their argument to him about things that are before the court. But then you also have the reality that you no longer have the checks on that court that you would want to have, particularly in this scenario. Where does that leave us, Ellie?
Yeah, there were never any checks on this court. I hope the Democrats feel better now that they've probed it. Maybe Dick Durbin, you know, he wrote a strongly worded letter to John Roberts. Maybe next time Dick Durbin from the minority can beseech John Roberts. I don't think we've tried beseeching them yet. Look, if Donald Trump really wants to save TikTok, all he's got to do is buy Clarence Thomas a new yacht. That is fundamentally the problem here. And I'm not going to hear it from Democrats who are like, oh, now that Republicans are taking over. No. You had 4 years where you controlled the Judiciary Committee. You had 2 years where you controlled both the House and the Senate and the White House, and you did nothing. You did nothing to rein this court in ethically, morally, or legally. And now they're on fleek. Now they are off the chain. They can do whatever they want. Chuck Schumer has said, oh, the Supreme Court will be the bulwark against Donald Trump and his craziness. Are you kidding me? Have you listened to this Supreme Court? Have you seen how they just gave that man immunity, absolute immunity to commit crimes? You got to remember, the court during Trump's first term had a person called Ruth Bader Ginsburg on it, which brought the court to a 5-4 balance and gave Roberts a whole lot more power, right? Now she's passed away. Amy Coney Barrett has replaced her. It's a 6-3 court. Amy Coney Barrett has shown no interest in restraining Trump at all. Neither have the ones who are on the take. This is the reality that we face because Democrats did not do anything to restrain the court when they had the chance. And now, as the man who invented the internet said, we are about to enter a time of consequences.
Well, come on, Al Gore. Can I just say one thing, Michael?
What's that?
I just want to know, this is me with my offering plate for the sermon that Elliot just preached. Okay, so we're going to pass the plate. I do think that this point that he's making is actually really important. Democrats they sent a lot of letters, they put out a lot of tweets, and they made a lot of floor speeches. But they asked that John Roberts come to Congress. He said, I'm not coming. And they were like, okay. And I think that, you know, there was they should have upped the ante a little bit, ratcheted up the pressure. I didn't see any Democrats making their way over into the Supreme Court justice chambers. And while that seems kind of like, to do, I think given the stakes here and what has been happening with the court, it was necessary.
Well, Democrats.
Well, Simone, the thing is, just to hop in, the thing to do would be to cut their budget. Right? Oh. The Constitution says very little about the Supreme Court, but one of the things that's pretty clear is that Congress, not the court, controls the court's budget. If you want these men to pay attention, especially with all the reporting, with all the ethical probing that we have done. If you want these people to pay attention, you have to cut their money. The Constitution says that there will be a Supreme Court. It doesn't say they have to have a nice fancy office building to hold their hearings. They could have their hearings on the Washington Mall for all the Constitution cares, right? So like, if you come at their money, that's a way to make them adhere to some basic minimal ethical standards. But Congress didn't have the will to do that. And again, so now we live in these times.
Joining us now is host of Fast Politics podcast and Vanity Fair special correspondent Molly Jong-Fast. Molly, what do you make of former Speaker Nancy Pelosi whipping some votes here to make sure that Connolly, in the end, got the top spot on the committee over AOC, who many consider a generational political talent?
I was really glad you showed that clip from Jen Psaki because I thought that was really correct. And I would add that part of the problem in this cycle was that Democrats did all this really good once in a lifetime legislation, stuff like the Chips and Sciences Act, things that are like wildly important that really did actually, lower inflation or prevent, a lot of the sort of hard economic landing that a lot of us were worried about. And in fact, one of the big problems for Democrats was just that they couldn't transmit these wins to the voters. They had a real communication problem. And so when we sort of post-mortem the 2024 election, a lot of the thinking is that Democrats weren't forward-facing enough, frontward-facing enough, didn't necessarily do enough to engage in the vote with the voting public. So here is someone, AOC, who's extremely good at communicating with voters, who has a large platform, millions of followers, who people listen to and really like, and who can connect with young people. And more than that, even, she's able to connect with a certain kind of economic populism, which a lot of Democrats have struggled to connect with. So they had an opportunity to elevate AOC. And when you elevate AOC, you also elevate someone who has already their own media complex, in a sense.
And this is somewhat related, isn't it, Molly? I want to move to the post-election blame game that's playing out in the race to pick its, in terms of the DNC, their new chair, with progressives and moderates recriminating each other over whose messaging led to the party's loss to Trump, as well as how did they spend all the money? Did they make the right decisions in the $2+ billion that were spent? Do you agree with some progressives who say the Democratic brand is toxic? And how would you compare this to post-2016 in terms of the amount of internal unrest within the party?
So I don't necessarily think that a particular brand is toxic. Look, a lot of times people use elections to confirm their priors. So people who are very progressive feel that the party wasn't progressive enough. People who are this sort of never Trumpy feel that the party was too progressive. I'm not sure that matters so much. What we do know is that the party was not able to catch economic populism, despite the fact that they passed a lot of very populist legislation. So that in itself seems to me to be a communication problem. And my feeling was that Biden world just, because Biden was never a great interviewer, they just were sort of careful with him in a way that was really detrimental. And look, you had Trump running for president for 4 years, doing every interview, doing every media platform. And so the difference was he really took up all the oxygen. And you had Biden very, very careful, doing very little media. Then they had this debate, which was a kind of a fiasco. Then Harris took over. She still, much better at communicating, still did not do a ton of media. And then you had Trump on every single podcast. And my feeling really was that 2024 campaign, as well as though it did do a lot of great stuff, and she really did a valiant job considering where she, remember, she jumped in there 3 months before. Mm-hmm. But that 2024 campaign, I think if it had run in 2016, she would have won. But, the media is much smaller now. A lot of independent media is, these people with these large followings, people like AOC who can connect with voters, or even people like Joe Rogan. If you don't go on Joe Rogan's show, you don't get in front of Joe Rogan's people. There's no way to circumvent that. And I think that is a real that was ultimately the problem in that election.
Molly Jong-Fast, always great to see you. Thank you so much.